Joe?
Oh, I was gonna bring one, but I totally forgot it.
All right, well, it's almost 7, too late.
Next time.
Got one.
Shoot.
I just got a new horse. We call him Mayo. And sometimes mayonnaise.
This is gonna be a good meeting.
All right, please don't hold that against us. Let's start with the invocation. Mayor-elect Gross.
Let's pray. Father, we pause to thank you for this day. What a beautiful day, beautiful evening. I thank you for everyone who's here tonight, interest in the business of the city. I thank you for the members of this council. We ask tonight, as we look at tonight's agenda, that we have humble hearts and sharp minds. It's in Christ's name I pray. Amen.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you, Diane. Thank you, Jeff.
Jeff, but we kind of look alike.
Jeff and Diane.
No. You look a lot better, Diane. Yeah, so stop right
All
there.
right, so let the minutes reflect both Jeff and Diane are here, as are the rest of the council. So we have a full slate tonight. We'll start with the approval of the minutes from the September 5th meeting. Those were presented in board pack. Are there any edits, or is there a motion to approve those as presented?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
All right, thanks, Josh. Thanks, Cindy. Any final discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right. With that, welcome our visitors tonight. Good to see everybody. Appreciate you coming and spend the evening with us. Hopefully it won't be too long. Let's dive into reports. Oral communication. I've asked Jeff Rao from Baker Tilly to come and give us a executive summary of our comprehensive financial plan, which was just finalized earlier this month. So I think you all have copies. Jeff?
All right, well, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, council members. Appreciate your time this evening. As the Mayor mentioned, we have completed this year's comprehensive financial plan for the city as a whole. So, as the Mayor mentioned, we do have a handout that's sort of a summary, which we'll kind of follow this evening, just to kind of hit some of the high points. You also have a bound copy, which is the longer version. So if you're really interested in diving into the details, that's the report you'll want to reference. So we'll just kind of jump in here. Page 1, just as a reminder, really, as all of you know, the purpose of the comprehensive financial plan is to sort of assess where we've been, where we are currently, and also maybe more importantly, what do things look like ahead? So it kind of expands our planning horizon beyond just the current budget year and looks out over the next several years from a financial perspective. Next page, and I apologize. Oh, these are numbered, I see. Page 3, it's kind of in the dark shaded area there. So just a sort of a year-end review. The city, as it has in the past, finished very strong in calendar year 2022. Had over $14.5 million, or roughly $14.5 million in cash as of the end of the year. If you consider the levy funds, the selected levy funds, general, park, airport, cemetery, et cetera, we've got them listed there. If you combine all those funds in total, they all in total outpaced expenditures by about $3.6 million. So as a whole, we had a positive year. In total, there was about $46 million of cash within all of the city's civil funds. If we looked at year-end 2021, it was 42 million, so we actually improved on that just a little bit, about $4 million for the year. If we focus specifically just on the general fund, which is obviously very important, the ending cash balance at the end of the year was about $7.6 million, which is about 60% of the total annual operating expenses. And just sort of as a reminder, at the end of the year, we always look at, what is your cash balance compared to the total annual expenditures? And we always recommend for your levy funds a minimum of 15% of your operating expenditures. So you can see with 60% balance, we far outweigh that minimum threshold, if you will.
Jeff, can I ask you a question before you move on?
Absolutely.
It's going to be easier for me if we do it as we go.
Yep.
Rather
Yep.
than wait till the end. Two questions, simple questions. On page 3, that item number 2 in the gray, it said the levy funds outpaced budgeted cash balances by 3.6. Is that telling me we took in 3.6 more in 2022 than we did 2021?
What that means, and that, actually, as I'm rereading that, it might be poorly worded. What that means is if you compare the budgeted expenditures, or I'm sorry, the budgeted cash flow, if you take the revenues, compare them to the expenditures, revenues exceeded by $3.6 million.
Okay.
So there's a positive cash flow balance
Okay,
of 3.6.
that's how I read it. I just wanted to be sure.
I'm glad you did, yeah, because that's really not real clear in terms of how we worded it.
Okay. And then my second question on item number 3 there in the salmon color box, the 46 million, does that include ARPA money and the other monies that came to the city through opioid and all the extra money that was coming in?
It does. That's all inclusive.
Okay.
On the civil side, that does not include sewage works funds. So that's just civil side, but it does include ARPA money.
Okay.
Yep, any cash, all cash that's on hand at the end of the year. Yep.
Very good. Thank you. Would that be in here somewhere deep in the?
It is. Actually, on page, it is reflected. On page 13.
Okay.
Of the detailed report. So it shows a history. It shows all of your major civil funds, starting with 2021 through 2022, and then it shows the projected ending cash balances for each of those funds through 2026.
Okay, I'm seeing it now.
So you'll see about halfway down,
Yep.
There's ARP, Coronavirus Local Fiscal Recovery Fund. At the end of 2022, the balance was about 2.4 million.
So we took in 2021, 1.7, and 2022, 2.4?
Well, you might have spent some of those dollars down.
Right, I
Yep.
get that.
So at the end of the year, you had a balance. So if you take what you received during 2021, 2022, minus whatever you've expended to date, that's what the ending balance would be.
But that was our share that's showing up.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay, so page 4, we always want to kind of take a step back and look at the trends in both net assessed valuation, which is the basis for obviously the revenues and the tax rate that's being generated, as well as circuit breaker tax credits. So the first box there that you see on the left, the blue shaded area, are the net property tax dollars being received. And the section in red are the circuit breaker tax credits. So you can see growth in both the net assessed value or net property tax, net property tax dollars, not net assessed value. net property tax dollars that are being received by the city, and then you can see the amount in the growth also in the circuit breaker tax credits. The good news is the growth in tax dollars is outpacing the growth in circuit breaker tax credits. So if you'll notice, between 2022 and 2023, tax revenues received in 22 was $14,586,000. The estimated property tax revenue for 2023 is $15.3 million, so there's roughly $700,000 increase there. If you compare that to the increase in circuit breaker increase is about $141,000. So we're actually net positive in terms of tax revenues, even though circuit breaker is increasing over time. So for 2023, total tax credits giving back to the taxpayers is just over $1 million, well, almost $1.1 million in tax credits. So if you look at the total pie, Kosciuszko County total circuit breaker credits is $2.8 million. City of Warsaw represents roughly 38%, which is pretty consistent with the past years. And again, 38%, that's how we get back to roughly the 1.1 million. Any questions? All right, page 5. This is a comparison of the certified tax rates year over year compared to the net assessed value in total of the city. So again, we're seeing positive trends here. We're seeing an increase in net assessed value, which is what we would hope and expect with all the growth going on. About $1.2 billion in 2023. And conversely, we see a reduction, or at the very least, staying steady. Actually, it's a reduction over the 5 years, but a reduction in the tax rate. So if we look back to 2019, tax rate was $1.25. The tax rate for 2023 is $1.19 rounded up. So actually a 4.7% reduction in the tax rate over that 5-year period. Okay, page 6. This kind of gets back to the historical ending cash balances that we were briefly talking about on the first schedule. So this is a trend year over year showing the selected operating funds. Starting in 2013, you can see that those total funds totaled $10.7 million, and then we see a gradual increase over time. So when we get to the end of 2022, we see roughly $14.5 million in the selected operating funds. So that's roughly a 35% increase over 2013 over time. The green dotted line, these are just for reference, represent the 50% cash reserve. So that would be 50% of the annual operating expenses. And then the red line is the minimum 15%. So you can see that every year the city has exceeded not only the 15%, but also the 50% cash reserve, which is the strongest, obviously the highest of the two measurements. All right, page 7, historical expenditures. Again, same selected operating funds. We have seen a trend increase in those operating expenses, which is to be expected with inflation and other factors going on. About $14.9 million in 2013. That went up to $22 million at the end of 2022, so roughly a 48% increase in operating expenditures over that period. So, obviously, we've been hit fairly hard with inflation over the last couple of years, although that's not reflective of the entire increase. Obviously, as the city grows, that requires more service, more spending, and so we've seen that, over time. All right, so we're going to kind of shift to sort of our look ahead with three-year capital improvement plan. Page 8. In total, and I have a correction here, the information in green there says $35 million. It's actually $46 million. I just caught that this afternoon. But about $46 million in planned or proposed estimated capital improvements over the next 3 years. So obviously, pretty big lift there in terms of capital expenditures. I know even though we planned the city in the past, obviously takes on those expenditures, but not to the extent where we're looking at reducing cash balances below recommended levels as we've seen. But nonetheless, pretty heavy lift. We did list out a few notable projects you'll see here. Ladder truck, which is fire equipment. There's some stormwater projects, about 1.2 to 1.7 million. Innovation Center, roughly 1.5. Airport taxi lane, reconstruction. There's areas within the northern TIF, 300 North, Phase 3, and 200 West Road project, roughly $3 million between the two. Mariner Drive, $3.5 million, and Gatke project gap, about $2.75 million. So these are just a few of the selected higher dollar projects that we just wanted to highlight. Okay, next page. So after taking into account, first of all, we looked at every individual fund and we projected out over the next 3 years based on estimated spending plans, so operating expenses, non-operating revenue, obviously property tax dollars, income tax dollars, and we overlaid that with, revenues, and we overlaid that with operating expenses and capital projects that we kind of noted here. So what you can see is, starting with 2022, again, ending cash for these selected funds, roughly $14.5 million. If the city did everything that was proposed over the next 3 years and paid for those out of cash, what we'd be looking at is a reduction of about $7.5 million in cash balances within those funds. So we'd be looking at going from $14.5 million down to about $7 million. Now, obviously, that's not the plan to spend down cash to that level. So one of the things we looked at and are looking at are ways to sort of massage those numbers, whether it be issuance of debt, which I know the city's looking at, moving projects around, could be delaying projects, and some of those things we'll get into here in a second. But wanted to make sure that was important to point out that this is not the plan to spend down all cash. This is just what it would look like if the city utilized cash to pay for all those projects. All right, so a couple comments about findings and action plan alternatives. As I just mentioned, if the city were to utilize its cash only to pay for operations and take on the $40+ million of capital, we'd see about a $7.5 million decrease in cash balances over the 3-year period. Within the general fund, individually, we'd be looking at a decrease going from $7.5 million down to $3.2 million at the end of 2026. So again, if we're going back to those recommended cash reserve balances at $7.5 million, we're at 59% at 3.2 million. If we were to spend it down that far, we'd be at about 20%. So we'd still be above that minimum 15% threshold. But even said that, it's not the expectation to actually spend dollars to the 3.2. So, what are some of the proposed action plan alternatives? Well, first of all, I think it's important to point out that, when we're preparing these numbers, the city, as you know, never spends its entire budget, right? So we're conservative when we're looking at putting these numbers together. And, we're basing our baseline for operating costs are your 2023 budget, since that's been adopted. And so we project from there, assuming that the city is going to spend down its entire budget. But that's not typically the case. And towards the back of the detailed report, we show what the city spends year over year compared to budget. And it spends roughly about 90%. Now, some of those percentages vary depending on the individual funds, but if you look at all those funds in total, it only spends roughly 85 to 90%. So our numbers here are a little bit conservative, but that's okay. We like to be conservative. So what are some other items to kind of point out here? And we've talked, I don't think any of these are new. We've talked about these in the past. Obviously, the city has the ability to shift some of its levy from one fund to another fund. So if we have one of your funds that's healthier than others, you could always look at shifting some levy to another less healthy fund. You could always look as well, looking at shifting some expenses from one fund to the other. Now, that doesn't change decrease in funds in total, but it does help individual funds that may be not as healthy as other funds. Another item we've talked about in the past, I know the city I believe the city is doing this. It always looks at, reassessing fees that the city charges. Could be permitting, could be, park fees, rental fees, those types of things that may not be a big change at the street level, but, over time, when you kind of add those up, it can have a good amount of impact. So it's always good to kind of take a step back every now and then and reassess those fees to make sure you're at the very least recovering the costs associated with providing that service. Top of page 12, this one sort of goes without saying, but basically balanced budget, right? Matching budgeted expenditures with the anticipated revenue. We know that's not possible in every fund every year because sometimes costs are cyclical. And, you may save, or not spend what you need, are expecting to spend, but then you spend that down on a particular capital project in one of the years down the road. So, but as a general practice, looking at, trying to match budgeted expenditures to estimated annual receipts. Alternative 4, and again, this is something I know that the city is doing, but look at utilizing TIF, more specifically the northern TIF allocation area to help pay for some of the capital improvement plan, and that is being looked at and being done, I know. And by the way, in the detailed report, we do have a list of all the capital projects and the expected funding source, so that is in there. And what you'll find is that quite a few of those projects are estimated to be paid for with the northern TIF funds. So let's hope the state doesn't take that tool away from us, right, anytime soon. So alternative 5, again, just continuing to pursue alternative revenue sources, i.e. grant opportunities. I know Community Crossings looks to continue. I know there's some NDOT grants becoming available with the Inflation Reduction Act, not Inflation Reduction Act, but rather the Infrastructure and Investment Act. There's dollars that are being funneled through NDOT for transportation projects. EDA, obviously Ready 2.0 that's going to be coming out, and pursuing those opportunities. Alternative 6, issuance of general obligation and/or lease rental bonds for capital projects. The city, as you're aware, the state prohibits communities or cities and towns from issuing above 2% of their net assessed valuation. So if we were to look at your current bonding, the city's current bonding capacity, it's currently at $5.9 million. So the city could issue up to $5.9 million in property tax supported debt without exceeding that constitutional debt limit. If there is a project that exceeds the constitutional debt limit, there are mechanisms to issue debt that exceeds that amount, and it's called a lease rental. Don't need to go into that. I think most of you are probably familiar with that, but there are opportunities and mechanisms to leverage debt around that state bonding capacity limit. All right, alternative 7, always looking at refunding opportunities for the city's outstanding debt. I know we've done that in the past. I think the last one we did was the sewage works, perhaps. We continue to monitor that every year to look for opportunities. Bond market hasn't cooperated over the last couple years, or at least year and a half. We saw pretty big spikes in interest rates within the bond market. Now they've started kind of coming down a little bit, still at historical lows in terms of bond yields, but higher than what we experienced for roughly a 10-year period. Alternative 8, reduce or delay portions of the city's capital plan. We kind of already talked about that, and I know that's a practice that the city always utilizes. The last alternative, page 15, the city would have the ability to petition to increase the fire territory's maximum property tax levy. In 2022, the city was eligible for a $600,000 increase, so that is a tool that if the city had a desire to increase that property tax levy, it looks like there could be some opportunity there to do so. So generating some additional tax dollars there and less reliance on local income tax as far as fire territory goes. So I think that kind of wraps up at least the summary. Again, overall, the city continues to be on a very positive path from a financial and growth standpoint. Again, increases in assessed values, which is good. Managing tax rate or decreasing tax rates, while at the same time taking on pretty significant capital projects. So with that, be happy to answer any other questions.
A lot of information in there. You have a chance to sit down and really dive into this, but just saying we've been doing this for several years now, and this forces us to look at our spending both 2 years back and then 3 years forward. The exercise tells us, what we've been doing is good, but it's a slippery slope if you don't heed the advice and follow the information and proposals that have been given. And it's been a great guidance for us. I know, we want to grow, but we have to spend to grow. There's a return on investment when we do that. And then hopefully an impact on our tax rate, which we've seen the last 12 years. So, but it's certainly a balance. And, I think one of the best exercises every year is looking at our capital plan and looking ahead and asking our department heads what their needs are going to be, not only this year and next year, but the 2 years beyond that. And if that's the case, where are we going to get the money? And all of this is subject to change. You know, we look at the amount of money that we received from the government, from ARPA and the opioid and all the incentive plans that came down. I don't think that's going to continue, but we know inflation is going to continue. So I think it's very important to keep a very close pulse on our spending. And I appreciate what Baker Tilly has done for us. And again, any other questions?
Yeah. Jeff, you've been with us for quite some time. And you've seen how we react to things, how we've handled this whole process over the years. And if you had to describe it in broad terms, what would you say? Because you say that Warsaw is doing well, and it appears we are. What would you say the overarching big, broad idea is that makes this work for us?
Yeah, that's a good question. Every community is a little bit different. I would say for the city of Warsaw, it's the ability to grow within the industry sector. And that's what enabled you to continue that increasing your net assessed value every year, year over year, at a pretty good pace. And that's not always the case. There have been some communities that have grown their assessed value, but some of that has to do with reassessing home values. We have seen a spike in that, and some of that is true, obviously, for the city of Warsaw. But you've been able to maintain and grow your commercial, industrial, manufacturing base, and I think that goes a long way towards these positive trends continuing. Obviously, the managing of the tax rate, keeping taxes low. But I think the process that you've been going through in looking at, again, not just the next budget season, but proper planning, being proactive, looking ahead at, okay, what projects do we have? What projects do we want to take on? But also, what projects can we afford to do, right? I think you can generally always find a way to generate money to pay for projects, but is it fiscally sound, right? And I think the city has continued to do that through a combination of paying for capital projects, both on a pay-as-you-go basis, also leveraging with the right amount of debt. When you look at the city's debt per capita compared to other communities of similar size, you're on the lower end. You're certainly below average. So you've been able to do these things without having to leverage too much in terms of debt, pay for things on a pay-as-you-go. Now, sometimes that means you have to spread those projects out a little bit further, but I would say the city's lived within its means. And sometimes that's difficult to do, especially when you're trying to grow, which the city has done. So I think it's really a balance between all those things.
Thank you.
And Jack, just having the ability to look at these projects well in advance allows us to be able to go out and fund those and not just shoot a big wad of cash at them and then here we sit with a problem. So again, I think this exercise has allowed us to be successful by forcing us to look ahead at projects that are important for the growth of the community. So, good question. All right. Jeff, thank you very much.
Yep. My pleasure. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank
So,
you.
I think copies of this are in the library as well, of board pack. So, and you've got bound copies here as well. All right. So with that, there's no unfinished business. Let's move into new business.
Joe, did you want to mention the?
Oh, that's right. There's something out of order here down on item 7 under new business. It's just the August fund report for your edification. That should have been up in reports, oral and written communications. And I don't know if you had any questions on the funds, but there's no action required, obviously, on this. Lynn, any comments from your end?
No, I don't have any comments.
All right. So let's move to the budget. Ordinance 2023-1002, tonight is a public hearing for our 2024 appropriations and tax rates. And you'll see that Lynn has put the budget for form in board pack in Form 3, which basically lists the budget estimates and works through the levy for each of these funds and coming up with a tax rate. And I'll just note on page 1, if you go to the bottom, you'll see the tax rate is accumulated at $1.3983. And Lynn is following the prescribed requirements of the state that we use only 90% of our assessed value when we figure this. And that's the way they do it. I always have Lynn and Kelly up the office, and I tell them that I'm glad you do that, but I'm looking at the certified AV, which is the full 100%. And at this point, it gets us down around a high $1.23, $1.24. That's assuming that we're at the maximum levy, both in the fire territory, the operating fund, and the civil city side of it, the debt service levy, fire equipment replacement fund, and the park bond. So those all add up with the full certified AV at about $1.24. So kind of in line with Jeff's discussion, looking back 10, 12 years, we've been as high as almost $1.28 in 2019. We've been as low as $1.17 back in 2013. We were just $1.18 last year, but there's a few things that are going to bump that up. And one of those is the park bond. It's about 3 cents will be added to the rate for the bond for the park maintenance building. If you remember right, we paid down cash, I think about a third of that, and then put the rest of it just on an 8-year bond, and that's why it's a little bit higher. But that adds 3 cents to this thing. Lynn, I'm going to ask you to comment on the debt service. Last year, they reduced what we could collect in our debt service, and we're not sure why, but it put us behind. Last year, the rate was only 0.27 cents, and this year you'll notice it's up to 1.5 cents, which is a significant increase. Lynn, any comments on that?
That when the DLCF, the 17.2 notice, they used our operating balance for what the budget should have been. The operating balance was at 15% of what the budget should have been, so. That was
So we didn't collect. We probably would have been closer to $1.20 last year had they figured that correctly. The fire rate is up about 1.6 cents. And that's because last year they had from the fire pension budget, I think they had about $400,000 that they were able to utilize to pay the pension, which they don't have this year. So that accounted for us going all the way to the levy on that. So again, we're looking somewhere around $1.24, which I would say is probably pretty decent given what we're looking at here. And looking back 12 years, it still stays within that pretty flat range of tax rates. So with that, I think that's all I have as far as comments on what we've seen in the 4B forms, which are the individual budgets. Again, you can go down and see all of the funds in their budgets and their levy. And Lynn Kelly and her department did a good job getting that all put together.
Still a work in progress.
So tonight, this is our first public hearing on the budget. Before I open it up, I'll just ask the council if you've got any concerns or questions. Again, as Lynn said, we'll be reacting all the way up to December when we get the 1782 notice. It looks to me like we're sitting in pretty decent shape. Probably have to make some cuts, but we always do.
But basically, we're looking at this as a not to exceed these amounts.
Yeah.
You
Yes.
always advertise high,
Exactly.
so just in case something happens or whatever.
All right. Well, if there's no other questions with that, I will open the floor to the public as a public hearing and ask if there are any comments or questions on behalf of or in favor of or in opposition to ordinance 2023-1002. Again, we will, this is our first hearing. The second hearing will be at our first meeting in October. But for now, just ask if there are anyone from the public who wishes to speak on behalf or against the proposed budget. Okay. All right, hearing none, I will close the public hearing and send it back to the council for your action on first reading.
I'll make a motion, we approve ordinance 2023-1002 on first reading.
Thank you, Diane. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All right, Cindy, thank you. And remember, these amounts can be reduced, and we will go through that exercise. So, all right, any other final comments? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, ordinance 2023-1002 passes on first reading. All right, item number 2. Actually, items number 2 and 3 are something new for this council, new for the city. I want to give just a little bit of context and background, and then I'll have our city attorney fill in the gaps. State Representative Ethan Manning proposed 3-way liquor permits. Actually, they're supplemental 210 permits. They're intended for restaurants. In his bill, House Enrolled Act 1200. And he proposed for many communities in central and northern Indiana, anywhere from 1 to 4 additional permits for the community, for the city, for whatever jurisdiction that they were listed in. But being these 210 alcohol permits, they're required to follow State Code 7.131917, which requires that those that are interested in these file an application with the state, and then they have to file a commitment to the community on the type of business that they're going to operate. And then the council is required to pass an ordinance approving that. So tonight we're here to entertain 2 of these requests. These requests are for businesses that, again, are typically restaurants. And when they renew, they have to come back to the city as well. So as a body, the legislative body has control over who utilizes these permits. Scott, I'll let you pick up.
Yeah, so I had a question earlier, and the really beneficial thing, particularly for the 2 permits that were made available for the city of Warsaw, is they are supplemental 210 permits, which allow the sale of beer, wine, and liquor on premises at the restaurant. It's not a carry-out permit, it's a on premises. As you know, restaurants have all kinds of different things they may apply for and get a wine-only permit. Some have also carry-out permits that allow them to sell carry-out as well. But this is a supplemental 210 permit. A real advantage of this supplemental 210 permit, quite frankly, is the cost. If they had to go out and buy a 210 permit from another restaurant that may be interested in selling theirs, it'd be quite expensive. So this has been a benefit to the communities that without quota, they are able to offer these supplemental 210 permits, and Warsaw has 2. And so part of this statute under Title 17 is the restaurants are to make a commitment to the community of what kind of a restaurant they're going to be, whether they're going to be whatever they want to tell you they're going to be, to try to satisfy you as the city council that that's the kind of a restaurant that you want in this community, and that they'll do a good job with the permit, the supplemental permit that they're being granted. So they could tell you they're going to be, in this case, it looks like we have an authentic Mexican restaurant, an authentic Italian restaurant, are who's here before you tonight. I suppose it could have been any one of the different types of restaurants or nightclubs or whatever that might apply to tell you what they're going to be, but it looks like members from both restaurants are here tonight to answer questions if you have any from them, but they're to provide a formal written commitment. They have to stay that genre of a restaurant. If they don't, and they think, and you as a city council believe that they're not true to what they tell you in their written commitment in the future, you can file somewhat of a complaint with the Alcohol Commission and ask that something be done about it. So that's unique as well. So they're both here. They're both here to answer questions about the written commitment. But you have a written commitment before you. If you're satisfied with the written commitment and the commitment they're making to this community of what kind of a restaurant they're going to be or have been, then you can approve their written commitment, adopt the ordinance, and once that's done, then that's a big step for them moving forward with obtaining their permit from the state.
So these permits are not transferable. Just be advised of that. I'd mentioned that Senate Enrolled Act 1200 took effect on July 1st of 2023. And some of the communities that were allowed extra permits included Auburn, Kendallville, Warsaw, Winona Lake, Syracuse, Whitestown, Lebanon, Zionsville, Westfield, Carmel, and Fishers. And there are other provisions for other alcoholic beverage rules and regulations. It's about a 30-page bill. These were, I think the Warsaw started on page 19 of the bill. But as Scott said, this is your opportunity to understand what they're wanting to do. And if you feel that this meets what we're trying to do here in the city, then you all have the right to decide and to approve this. It is an ordinance form. I think we'll just decide whether or not we want to suspend rules depending on how this comes out as we move along. But I wouldn't say that would be vitally necessary. We'll take each one of these one at a time. The only other thing I said, as Scott mentioned, we've got opportunities if what they say they're doing and what they're actually doing conflicts. The city does have a say-so in this. And that puts you all, like I said, in a very unique position. I don't think we've ever had to we've never really been in the business of issuing alcohol permits or approving alcohol permits. This is usually done at the ABC level. But I think what the legislature is trying to do is they understand as communities trying to improve their quality of place, the quality of life, creating entertainment districts, riverfront districts. They want to make sure that I think the restaurants have the opportunity to provide the full dining experience, if you will. So again, this is relatively new for the city. These were the first two applicants that came to us. I know having just two, here we are tonight with two applicants. So with that, I will start
Mayor,
with.
can I just ask?
Sure.
Before we get into the specifics of these two applications, I just had a couple of general questions. First of all, what would trigger a revocation of somebody getting one of these and the city has to take it back? Or would it be physically moving the restaurant to a different location? Would it be a new owner? Would it be a violation of some kind? How does that work, and do we do it? The mayor said something about going to the ABC, but the ABC's not giving it away. It doesn't belong to them. I guess it belongs to the city of Warsaw. So could you explain some of that to me?
So a 210 permit can come available a couple ways. It can become available by quota, which is determined upon census and other stuff. And there are numerous 210 permits in the city of Warsaw that were part of the quota that allowed a 210 permit. These two are unique because they were supplemental without anything to do with the quota. So they were just two additional permits created by House Bill 1200. But once these 210 permits are approved, they're going to be governed by the same rules of all the other 210 permits. The excise police are going to go in if they need to. They're going to have qualified staff, and they're going to have to be licensed, and the people serving, they're going to have to follow all those rules. The slight bit of uniqueness about this supplemental 210 is all the other 210 permits, you've never had a say since you've been on the council about any alcohol permits. This is unique because it is a supplemental permit. And so their commitment is unique. They're not normally required to make the formal commitment like this for a 210 permit. But under this particular statute, they're committing to you the kind of restaurant that they're going to be. And if at some point they violate other alcohol rules, they're going to be in trouble with the excise and with the alcohol commission and all that stuff. If they violate their formal commitment, we have the right to complain about the permit to the state authorities that govern the alcohol permit. So I think it's a pretty serious commitment, but from what I've seen from the two applicants, you know, Salvatore's has always been an Italian restaurant, as far as I know. That Taqueria El Camal has always been a Mexican restaurant, and they both have a long history of doing that. So I think you're probably familiar with the background of both of these applicants and the kind of restaurants that they've had in our community or in other adjacent communities. So I would only assume that they go forward with that.
About them, I was just wanting some general information.
I think the idea is that the community can decide what type of establishment they want, and then that's the leverage that the city has in exchange for a permit that's relatively inexpensive, and there are more permits available. So it just gives the city a little bit of control over.
So if their business grows because of this and they want to move, that's not a violation of any agreement, or the state allows that to happen?
Again, I can't answer that legally, but I assume that that's provided.
I mean, I
for
hope
in
they
the
do grow,
language.
but
Yeah.
I'm just wondering.
It can't be transferred from what we understand.
Correct.
So that's the only, but they talk about,
A normal 210 permit is marketable. It can be transferred
Right.
from any type of a restaurant to any other type of a restaurant, and that's just how it goes. with the formal commitment, you all have oversight for as long as they have these permits to be able to hold them to their commitment. And if they would want to change their commitment, they would have to come back before the city council and try to reach an agreement about changing their commitment, because you would all have to approve that if they change the nature of their business.
And according to 7/13/1917, it says a formal written commitment. If the amount of time a formal written commitment is valid may not be limited or restricted. So this liquor permit, as long as you feel they're meeting their commitment, can go on and on and on. It just can't be transferred. And Mike, to answer your question, the only language in here, it says, if the character or type of business violates the formal written commitment, the municipality may adopt a recommendation to the local board and the commission to deny the permit, revoke the permit, or have a hearing, I would assume. So it just gives us the opportunity to initiate that if it's not meeting what this original written commitment entailed. Questions before we move ahead?
I would imagine, it doesn't say so here, but if the business were to move outside the city limits, per se, then that would be, since that's I would think that would be reasonable. But that's the only other thing I could think of.
Yeah, that 210 permit is for the city of
City.
Warsaw. So that would,
So we would just be able to then allocate that to a new business?
Exactly. But no more than the two.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So with that, I'll call on our first applicant, Dr. Kiri Al-Kamal. I think, Jack, you'll represent them if you want to step to the podium. And
I'm Jack Birch. I'm here on behalf of Mila and Tony Mendoza. They've operated Taqueria El Kamal. I apologize for butchering my Spanish. But they've been in the business, the restaurant business in Warsaw for about 18 years. They've operated a couple different businesses. Gordita's was one of them. At one time, they were operating two restaurants, both carrying the name of El Kamal. But when the pandemic hit and all of the restrictions there, they ended up selling one of the El Kamal restaurants to another family member. But now they run and operate Taqueria El Kamal, and they have since 2013. So we're about 10 years of history. To follow up on some of the questions, the liquor regulations are confusing and, in my opinion, antiquated, and we really kind of go through a lot of hoops. But this client approached me months ago about whether it was possible to get any kind of liquor license. It's a small family-run business, and quite frankly, the answer to that was no, unless you have a lot of dollars to buy somebody out, if anybody's willing to sell. That's just not viable. But this House bill was very fortuitous from our perspective, allows us to make that application. Obviously, having the opportunity to sell alcohol on premises tends to be a benefit to restaurants, and it's obviously an additional income stream, but also enhances the dining experience for many customers. And you know, there are certain circumstances where some customers may choose another restaurant for whatever reason if there's not an alcohol available. But in our commitment, and one thing I want to say is alcohol licenses are site-specific. No matter what license it is, it's site-specific. This is also personal and can't be transferred. So if someone had a restaurant on a certain site and decided to sell it, they can go through the transfer process as long as the permit doesn't move and the person is otherwise qualified. They would be able to continue it. That's not the case in this situation. If the Mendoza's ever decide they want to get out of the restaurant business, that license no longer exists. It's similar to what riverfront licenses are.
well, it does exist for the cities.
Yes, I'm saying
Right.
they lose the right yes, they would lose the right. It would go back and become available. If they wanted to move, they'd have to find a location. Number one, they'd have to come back to you and ask if you were okay with that, because it would be a modification of what our commitment is. Our commitment is to stay at 828 Winona Avenue and to run a family-operated business specializing in Mexican cuisine. If for some reason they wanted to expand their menu or whatever, they'd have to come back to you and ask for that. Hopefully, the city would be a little understanding in that regard. But if they operated something that that violates the commitment, such as a nightclub, a tavern, those sorts of businesses, that you put that in front of the ATC, and in my experience with the ATC is they're going to look very strongly on what the local government says. So I think that would be very difficult for us to defend that. So we think, or we hope, that our commitment is sufficient to convince you that our track record and what we have been doing, what we intend to do going forward, is sufficient to allow us then to make the application. This is actually the first step. We have to submit this as part of our application. So if you have questions, I'd be happy to answer everything I can. Mila is here also representing her and her husband, Tony. Tony is out of the country, right? Tony's out of the country for a little bit. But that's our request, and hopefully you'll accept that and pass the ordinance. And honestly, if you would see fit to suspend your rules and go ahead and pass it completely, that would certainly be beneficial from us, for our standpoint, from the standpoint of being able to apply faster. So, any questions?
So I think I would ask that you look at their written commitment letter that's been provided to you. I think that's really what you're being asked to consider tonight. And I think, just to point out, item 4, basically the commitment is that they will continue to be operated as a family-oriented restaurant specializing in Mexican cuisine, and will not operate as a nightclub, adult entertainment establishment, or tavern. So I think that gives you, in addition to the history and everything else that's on here, that would, to me, be an important part of what you would consider. I know you've all looked through this. Do you have any questions of the petitioner about what they're proposing here?
I do have a question on item number 5, and it might be for our attorney as well as their attorney, where it says that the commitment may be modified by the common council with the agreement of the establishment. So if we want to modify it and they don't agree, does that mean we can't modify it? Is that what that says?
We can't make them be the restaurant you want them to be. They can come here and tell you, this is the restaurant we are, this is the restaurant we're trying to be. I think that is, if there's, like Jack said, if there's a necessary change in their menu for some reason, something else becomes popular or something additional, they want to be 2 kinds of restaurant, they could come and ask if you would approve that. But once they make the formal commitment, if they're doing what they say they're doing, then they're in good standing, and this council wouldn't change that. I think it's more the other direction. If they came and said, we need to change what we promised we were going to be, would you be acceptable to that? I think that's the nature of what the formal commitment's about.
Yeah, I think it's in essence almost a contract. We're saying, we're going to do this. You say, okay, we want you to do that. If you want us to do something different, we have to agree, just like you would have to renegotiate a contract. That's how I sort of envision it, that either side can propose something, but both sides have to mutually agree to it.
I don't envision this city council being in the general business of being involved in alcohol permits. I think tonight you're going to hear about it, and if it's acceptable and you think it's good, then you're going to approve it and the ordinance is going to pass and we'll move on. And we probably won't see this kind of thing very often. You haven't seen it in a long, long time. You've never seen it. I don't think it's going to be regular council business, that kind of a thing. So
you're going to get a copy of our renewal application. Right. Just as a reminder, hey, we're coming up, and do you have any issues?
Well, to your point, this is new to all of us.
Sure,
And I'm
absolutely.
just trying to learn
No, absolutely.
kind of as I go.
And as Jack said, when the new renewal permit comes up, that'll be probably, if you're really not happy with what's going on with either of the restaurants that apply tonight, that will probably be your opportunity to not approve a future formal commitment. If you could just say no with no good reason or no reason at all if you weren't happy with how this all goes, or in the future, if you're not happy with these restaurants, you can just say no to their formal commitment. But that's the good part about the renewal. Will be probably the next time you'll see this in front of.
So a renewal permit would be triggered by any change in the establishment, the food, the owner, the,
No, they're only good for a year. We have to renew every year.
oh, okay. No, I learned something. Okay.
The state gets their fee every year.
I find it very interesting that they would have to ask for us to renew it if they change their menu. That seems to be a little,
It's
a
what
little
our.
heavy-handed.
Well, to a certain extent, I mean, I will tell you, Scott and I, and I've been in contact with the ATC, the processor, and their legal counsel. This is new.
Yeah, and my,
It's a little bit
right,
seat of
isn't
the
with
pants.
you guys, it's with whoever set it up.
So when I drafted the commitment, I tried to not lock in too far, but this is what the business is, and we're trying to describe this is what the business is. We intended for it to continue that way. So I don't, and the give and take is you can't dictate to us that we need to change our menu to be, whatever. But if we want to change it to that and you think, well, that's not a good fit, you can veto it too. So we kind of try to work together. I don't anticipate you trying to tell us what our menu would be.
They're
because
not
that's our
talking
business.
about like what their menu looks like if you walk in today. They're talking about if they want to add Asian food. for
Yes,
instance.
it's generally
Like
we
if-
want to be a
if they-
Mexican oriented.
Yeah, if they want to switch to Chinese or.
Yeah, I find it hard to believe that this council would have a problem with the menu. It would be
exactly, yeah.
So
Can we see the menu, please?
Yeah, we get it.
I do want to add one other thing. Jack, representing the Mendoza family, came to us in probably mid-July when they had been made aware of this type of license being available, and met with Scott, and we've initiated. In this case, they were the first one that actually asked specifically for this permit. Salvatore's, on the other hand, had been talking to us about trying to find a permit even before that. And then when this was made known that this type of license was available, that was another option that we gave them. So we're dealing with two restaurants who have been looking for liquor licenses for some time, who both approached us, and that's why we are recognizing the first two that are here to go through this.
And I would
process.
say that the House Bill 1200 was very expansive. It contains a lot of stuff. Like as an attorney reading House bills that's not yet codified and whatever. I mean, there's stuff in there, and you've probably heard this as you've went about. There's stuff in there about families can go into a bar and sit at a table or a booth. They can't sit at the bar. So that's fairly groundbreaking for the state of Indiana, but that's in there. And these supplemental permits are in there. But I know in talking with the attorneys for Jack and the attorneys for Salvatore's, at the state level, we're at the front of where the guidance is. I'm trying to say this in a kind way that there's not a lot of guidance from the state level on what they specifically want from this, because I think these might be the first two, or close to the first two, that near the top of who's getting through the process of having them processed, these supplemental permits. I think some of the other municipality supplemental permits have not been approved yet, have not been sought, have not had big discussions with the state level people. And I think Jack and the attorneys for Salvatore are near the front of the line of trying to figure out the ins and outs of this House bill.
And as Scott said, we read through this bill, we went through it, we looked at it, and I'd mentioned Whitestown, Lebanon, Zionsville, Westville, Carmel, and Fishers. in those cases, they're required to be in a downtown redevelopment district or downtown economic revitalization area. The other permits, and I'm just going to say in Warsaw because I don't, but I assume the others were all, just had to be within the city limits, and that was the only restriction to it. So, all right, we're wading through all this.
Jack, related to items 3 and 4, operational hours, if you know, and do you plan on changing those hours?
I don't think we're gonna look at changing. Okay. And you're not open on Mondays?
Those are long days.
Right. So, basically 9 hours, 11 to 8 and 10 to 9.
And right now, no plans to change that? Okay. Okay.
I mean, we could put that in there, but
I just, thank you.
I have one question, and we probably don't know. I'll just leave it at that. But second generation in the plans for your family, and if there is a second generation that's going to want to run the restaurant one day, will that transfer? I mean, these are non-transferable, so.
they make provisions for a lessee.
Lessee.
Okay.
I saw
But
that
that
on
would be
number 5.
available for less than a year, because they'd have to re-up every year, right?
Yeah, there would be, I would envision that's a change that would have to come back, yes.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't think, unless, the only thing I can think of is, and I'm not sure that the Mendoza's, you just operate this individually, right? You don't have, yeah. If they formed an LLC maybe or something like that, and then one of the family members then became a member, that wouldn't be a change in the entity, so I could see it that way, but as this is structured and how they're gonna apply, I think they have to come back.
So if I can help on that a little bit, both the Taqueria El Camel and the Italian restaurant, they're going to be granted a license in the name of the business. The permit will not be given to an individual. On the application for the supplemental 210, it's the business that applies for the permit. And so I believe going forward with the value of getting a 2-ton supplemental permit, it would probably make more sense if there was going to be a change in ownership. There's probably not going to be a change in business, that it will continue to be these restaurants, is my guess.
Anytime the ownership changes in a permittee, those owners have to be identified, typically at the renewal process, and then they have to meet all the qualifications as well. So the business applies, but it also looks at who the ownership, the individual ownership is as well. So
The way this reads, it says a permit holder and any lessee or proprietor of the permit premises are subject to the formal written commitment. So as Jack said, the permit and as Scott said, the premises is what's getting the license.
Right.
It can be a lessee running it or another proprietor, but it has to go along with the permit, with the premises. And Jeff, to your question, I think hours and so forth, those are all governed by state ABC regulations. I don't think we need to get worried about anything like that.
Yeah, so it'll be subject to all the 210 supplemental permits everywhere else. They have to close at whatever time they have to close, and they can't start selling alcohol before any other time.
Yeah, but to his point, nightclubs have, or taverns have a certain thing, but if that's not what we want there, and we want lesser hours, I can see where that would matter.
Here's the good news, I
I'm
think.
not gonna ask for them to go.
I would say
less
this is kind of good news. In reading the 2 formal commitments before you, they are fairly definite in what they're telling you they're going to be.
Yeah.
They're not trying, neither one is trying to be as broad and as general as they can possibly be to try to. From what I read from both of the formal commitments, they seem very specific in telling you what their plans are and what they plan to be. And just kind of as importantly, I think it's what they already are. I think they're not, neither one of these are startup companies. They're both have have quite a tradition of something, of what they say they're still going to be. So I think that might give you, as the council, some assurance that they're pretty specific in what they're saying they are. They're pretty specific in their formal commitment of what they're going to be. And I think you'll be able to hold them to it if you believe they've become something different.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at, say, okay, we want to change our hours and run until 2 o'clock in the morning, probably you're going to be able to make a very good, strong argument that we're no longer a family business. We're doing something more than that. So I don't want to hamstring us to 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock.
And I'm not trying to hamstring you
Sure.
either. I think a lot of this is just questions because we're just trying to figure out what the process is.
And,
you know,
and we're
what
sort
are
of
the possibilities?
inventing the wheel.
Yeah, we are. Yes, we are.
I mean, Scott and I think we both reached out to the ATC and said, what are you looking for? And they had no idea. So we're,
That's typically what
Well, I think the statute gives us, as the council, it gives you the flexibility to say, if the character or type of business violates the formal written commitment, the municipality may adopt a recommendation, blah, blah, blah. So it's your decision, and it's very clear in the statute, and it's not very specific.
The statute's not very specific. I'm somewhat impressed that both of our requests are specific in what they're trying to tell you and specific in their commitment.
Yeah, I actually appreciate that. I mean, it makes it clear that you want to remain a family-owned business, that you have made a commitment to Warsaw, you've been here, and you intend to stay here. And I think that's important. That's the kind of business we're looking for.
and from our perspective, the permit will help us
Yes.
continue to be more successful, we think. So that's the hope.
Any further questions?
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
So having looked at the formal written commitment, then we move back to the ordinance. And basically, they're asking for our approval as they apply to the commission for one of these supplemental permits. Anything else to add, Scott?
No, I think I appreciate both businesses and their professional people I dealt with were very patient with me as I was patient with them and the mayor. It's new and it's something we haven't dealt with, and it's important, but I think we have it right, and I think everybody did a good job putting this together, quite frankly.
So understanding the process, this is just their first step, and then they have to file this with the state, and then it'll be reviewed by them, and then,
The truth is, they're in the middle of the other stuff. So they've already started with their application process. They've already been in contact with the people at the state level. They've already discussed filing for the supplemental permit. They've already had the discussions. They've already provided materials to the state. And this is just one of the steps that they're required to have to get this 210 supplemental permit.
Yeah, they're required to send a copy of the application to us. And that was the first thing
yeah,
that
that's
they
what you
did.
told us, yeah.
There's a whole laundry list of things that include floor plan and all kinds of things like that. This is just one additional one because of this type of permit.
Well, I'd move to approve number 20230901.
Thank you, Jerry. Is there a second?
I will second that.
All right, Cindy. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right. With a unanimous decision, you do have the option of suspending the rules and voting on second reading tonight if you desire.
I move we suspend the rules. I'm
I
sorry.
was just going to ask, can we ask the advice of council? Because this is new to all of us. What is your,
I have no issue with you suspending the rules. This has been many discussions with the state level people. This has been a process, a somewhat delayed process already for both petitioners tonight, or both permit seekers tonight. So I'm comfortable with suspending the rules and moving forward. We're not making groundbreaking changes in what the liquor laws are going to be in this town. We're just accepting the formal commitment from these two restaurants, promising that this council that they're going to do what they say they're going to do in their formal commitment, and both of which is what it appears they're already doing. So,
And I assume they still have, like you said, they've still got some work to do, even if you all decide to do this.
Right, we have our application, we have all kinds of certifications we have to make and additional information that we submit. But this is, if we don't have this, everything else
Right.
fails, so.
Any other questions before we,
Jack's made the motion to suspend the rules. So
well,
we
I
can-
think Mike got before him, and I want to give you guys
I
a
stopped.
chance to
Oh, you
discuss.
did stop?
I just want to make sure you're all comfortable, and I'm fine with that. I know there was some good questions, and with this being new, I just want to make sure you're all comfortable. Of course, you can indicate that by your vote, too.
You want to make that motion to suspend the rules or not?
I'll make the motion to suspend the rules.
All right, there's a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
I'll second that motion.
All right, is there any further discussion? And this is the motion just to suspend the rules. All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, let's go back to ordinance 2023-0901 for second reading.
I'll make a motion, we approve ordinance 2023-0901 on second reading.
Thanks, Diane. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thanks, Cindy. Any final discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, thank you.
Scott, you said get a copy.
yes, I absolutely will.
Thank you. All right, item number 3 would be a very identical request from Salvatore's. I think we've heard a lot of the discussion here, but I think we need to look at their written commitment and, hi,
Hello, good evening, everyone.
could you
My name is
introduce
Jeremy
yourself?
McLean with Salvatore's. Business partners Panos and Stephanie Baronis were not able to be here this evening, so I'll be representing Salvatore's as one of the operating partners.
All right,
What was your name again?
Jeremy McLean.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy.
all right, I think probably, since you got the background now, let's go to the Salvatore's written commitment that they've provided. I assume you've had a chance to read that, and I'd open the floor up for questions. I think under item 2, that's again where the important to me is that they will continue to operate a family-friendly, authentic Italian eatery at the permit premises for as long as the permit remains in effect. That they'll be a responsible retailer of alcohol and will at times comply with applicable state and local regulations concerning the sale of alcohol. So,
This isn't a question, it's more of a comment. I appreciate Salvatore's giving back to the community and hosting a turkey and toy giveaway every December for families.
Correct.
That is admirable. I appreciate our local businesses that give back, that realize the community in which they reside is valuable, and this is a good way of doing it. I applaud you for that.
Thank you.
anyone else? Well, again, we certainly appreciate the fact you're an established business here in town. You made a significant investment in the community. And to that end, I would ask the board the council what their pleasure is.
I just have one thing to say before that. I don't know Jeremy's business partners, but Jeremy's business partners should probably buy Jeremy a drink or something, because he did some heavy lifting on this one to get this moved forward. He was on top of it, very communicative, did a lot of hard work to try to move this forward, and so I appreciate his help in advocating for himself and their restaurant and moving this forward. He did a very good job.
So if there are no questions on the written commitment, let's go back to ordinance 2023-0902, which again contemplates a 210 supplemental permit for Salvatore's. And this would be by ordinance, your acceptance of their commitment.
I just have one other comment too. I appreciate the fact that you built here without the guarantee of that license and that you opened and you're maintaining a quality restaurant. And I appreciate your patience while we tried to find a way to assist what you asked us for when you very first pulled the permit to build here. So we appreciate that commitment to the community.
Thank you.
So I'll make a motion that we pass 2023-0902 on first reading.
Thank you, Diane. Is there a second? Second. Second by Jerry. All right, any other questions, discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? As with our custom, if this passes well, actually not our custom, this is by statute. If this passes unanimously, you're allowed to suspend the rules and vote on second reading.
I move to suspend the rules so we can entertain this ordinance on second read.
Thanks, Jeff. Is there a second?
Second.
Josh, all right, any, again, comments? All in favor of suspending the rules and voting on second reading, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right,
I move to approve ordinance 2023-0902 on second reading.
I'll second
thanks,
that.
Jeff, thanks, Cindy. Again, final comments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Jeremy. Thank you for your patience.
Well, it's been a long road for that liquor license. We've been working with Salvatore for almost a year now.
Yeah.
I think you made good choices for two reasons. Why we do have liquor licenses through the Riverfront District, but neither one of those qualify under that. So the benefit of having that liquor license for you to kind of dole out is you're picking areas that you can't get a license in otherwise. So both locations kind of met those requirements. You have before you a tax abatement application for Dalton Corporation at 900 East Jefferson Street. This is just an SB1 for personal property. If you remember correctly, personal property is purely based on the investment made. It's not based on jobs, so they're investing over $1.6 million in personal property for new equipment that will help them continue to hit production demands at their current facility. And they have roughly 200 total employees and would retain that number of employees. 10 years, like I said, is based purely on dollar amount committed, so anything over $1 million would be eligible for the 10-year tax abatement. I've included a schedule in your packet for that tax abatement, as well as I've included a presentation from Dalton's, basically talking a little bit about what they do and what the equipment placed would be doing and some future improvements that they might consider. Having said all that, Jacob Yanni from Dalton's is here, and he can certainly answer any questions you have about the equipment or Dalton's production moving forward. But certainly they would meet our requirements for a tax abatement approval.
All right, thank you, Jeremy. Jacob, you want to just introduce yourself and take questions?
Yes, Jacob Yanni from Dalton Foundry. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak this evening about Dalton. I believe Jeremy said you have the packet that we presented to the mayor and several other folks that came to visit back in August. Very happy to show off the foundry and what we're currently doing today. I've spent many years in billion-dollar companies and chose Dalton because it's a small business that has ties to the Warsaw community. For over 123 years, Dalton has taken and recycled scrap metal and turned that into quality castings that end up in many of the things that all of us touch on an everyday basis, from air conditioning units to engines and cars that you drive, the locomotives that move material down the tracks to get to supermarkets and all of that. That's all happening here in Warsaw, Indiana. So there's nothing more that I love than talking about all the neat things that are actually happening down the road that we don't necessarily advertise. Dalton has been owned by a private equity firm since May of 2016, and that private equity firm has steered and brought in new management to steer the company into a new direction, moving from less complex castings to more highly engineered, highly cored castings with a chemistry range and alloy range with very complex alloy configurations. So over the past 5 years, we've transformed the process to be able to handle more complex castings, but to really secure a place and develop a niche in the markets that we serve. 50% of the product that we build today are engine blocks that sell to General Motors, Ford, Chrysler. We sell to high performance dealers, so like Marshall and World Performance and Dart. Many of those engines you see in the racing industry, and that's what those cars are running on, are blocks just built down the road. We also provide engines for the AM General Humvee and Cummins engines that supply tanks. So not only has Dalton been around since 1910, it's gone through world wars supplying supplies and materials to help fight the fight. And so we're still working with the military and supplying blocks and engines. One of the newer items that we've launched, and we've gone through the largest launch in the company history, starting in 2018 with moving work from a company we purchased out of Wisconsin called Motor Casting. But we've launched a business that builds heads, liners, and pistons for locomotives that you see going down the tracks. This business, Motor Casting, had for over 70 years. And it's a very complex core package, highly alloyed with nickel and moly. And we're able to do that and have been very successful. So we've literally changed the portfolio and the book of business to a product mix that we have a very strong niche in, and it's allowed us to generate more money and generate investment back into the company. I have been with Dalton since 2018. It's been a very exciting ride. Now, the last several years were bumpy going through the pandemic and stretching our way through that, but working our way through it and coming out the other side with a very strong, viable company that's going to continue to invest is a very exciting prospect for me. So very proud of the work that the team has done at Dalton to get where we're at. Very proud of the ownership that's been very supportive. Now they've leaned on Dalton to generate the income to be able to support capital investment, but through that journey and even through the down times, there has been a focus on clearing up some issues that were historically with the foundry. There's been work done on the environmental side and cleaning that up and having those issues almost behind us. So very responsible from an ownership standpoint, the level of interest they've placed into the community to make this into a viable business. I believe if you go through the packet, it can get some little more details of the successes we've shared over the past 5 years, as well as the economic impact, which sometimes can be overlooked on a business of that nature. But I'm very proud that we've been able to keep the employment base up and offer some good jobs and increase the technical ability from what they were, say, 5-10 years ago with the quality of products that we produce. So if there's any questions, I'd gladly entertain them.
I appreciate the information you provided because sometimes you just take for granted
a business that's in the community, and you don't really think about everything that they do, so that was very helpful.
Thank you. And I feel strongly that, there's probably not a person in here that has not had somebody that they know or a relative that's worked at Dalton, and I'm the same way. So that's a passion for me to keep something that's been in this community that long going and make sure it goes for another 100 years. And is a good partner with the city and county.
We had a chance to go through the plant a few weeks ago and sit down and look at a little bit of history and where they're at, and obviously where they're going, as you've seen tonight with their investment in technology and walking through the plant. Didn't seem to be the same plant that went through 15 years ago.
Thank you.
So I would just make that comment. They're obviously committed to these new lines and their business taking off, so. And again, we're being asked tonight to consider a 10-year personal property abatement on the, looks like about the net estimate, well, 1.6 million. Is that correct, Jeremy? Yeah. Any final comments or questions before we consider this?
Well, I know I've seen them all my lifetime that I've been here, more, a little older than the rest of you folks, but
You almost made the 100 years, Jerry.
yeah. But they've always been very successful, I think. And
Now, I appreciate some of the environmental work you've done. I'm on the Watershed Foundation Board, and you have reached out to us and done some things to mitigate runoff and things like that, and I appreciate that commitment to the community, so.
Thank you. And yeah, Lynn and I have talked a lot about
Yeah.
Dalton, and I would someday like to take the watershed through there, so.
Yeah, I know you've been working with Brad to get some things set up, and
Yes.
so I appreciate that.
All right.
I'll make a motion that we approve this tax abatement.
Thanks, Diane. Thanks, Jerry. Any further comments, questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you for your time and thank you for your patience tonight.
Well, thank you
We
very much.
usually don't
I
go this
appreciate
long, but appreciate it.
it. Okay, well, thank you very much.
All right, thanks. All right, next item, we're just going to have a discussion, and if you're so moved, ask for your approval on the ARPA application. Jack has worked hard on that with Scott
And Cindy.
and Cindy. I
You
know
did a lot of the heavy lifting, though. You
we've
and
all
Scott.
sat down and
Scott,
looked
yeah.
at what we consider to be the best way to utilize these funds that have to be committed by the end of next year and spent by the end of 2026. So it's important to get this document taken care of so we can get moving on this. With that, Jack, you want to go ahead and walk us through this?
Well, let's see. As far as the grant agreement, I want to make sure that everybody understands. What you see here is a sample. There is a named organization in it that is being used only as an example, okay? Don't want that to be taken any way other than that. And wherever you see a dollar amount, that is also part of the sample. The percentages, those are all pretty much what we decided that we would try to do. Scott, do you have any comments on some of the, as far as the draft of the agreement?
Yeah, so this was just as an example, we just, there's no special plan for the city-county athletic complex as compared to anybody else who may apply this year, but just to demonstrate to the council what a potential sample agreement would look like. Previously, this council has made awards to the CCAC, so we use that as the template. And the dollar figures are just an example as well in this template. I think some of the decisions, and it was in here as well, is you as a council or the committee is going to decide what the range of requests for grants might be. I don't know whether they're going to be a few big grants or many smaller grants. That's something I think to be determined later, and I think it's going to be based upon the applicants that you receive. But it was clear in working with Jack and Cindy that in this particular case, that there wanted to be capital improvements or capital investments that did not want to go towards operating costs or just general funding. And that there was a desire for whatever group would apply, that they would have a board commitment to this. It wouldn't just be an individual member of some organization making the request, that they would have the board would acknowledge through their minutes that they were considering this capital improvement or this capital expenditure, and that they believed that they would be able to contribute up to at least 20% of the capital improvement project cost. One thing we did discuss is we thought some of the groups that may be applying, they might do better fundraising if they had this agreement in place to be able to tell different potential donors that we may have a commitment from the city of Warsaw to pay up to 80% if we can raise the other 20%. So we thought this may help in their fundraising endeavors as well to have the grant in this capacity. So I guess that's what I would say. Otherwise, there would be in the application part, we would request all the stuff we requested from them previously, that there'd be additional parts, but we wanted to make it clear that they had to be organized enough and committed enough that their full board or the majority of their board had passed this and provided us minutes or a resolution showing that they had committed to this specific capital project. We also had a desire to split it up 50% when they started the project and 50% when they completed the project. But we know how it is to get stuff built today. It's tough to get commitments from builders or bids or estimates. It's a difficult climate out there for many projects. So there was some flexibility on that, but we wanted to provide them with 50% of it at the start of the project and pay the remaining 50% of what we were going to pay them at the end of the project.
We had a lot of discussion of how we wanted to make the funds available. Would it be a reimbursement grant where they get it on the back end? And the council, Jack and Cindy felt like that it was important that they have some of the money, as Scott mentioned, to get materials purchased and that type of thing. So basically what we settled on was an 80-20 grant with the city providing 80%, 50% upfront, and then 50% at the completion of the project. So, Jack, is that pretty representative?
That's pretty much, yeah.
So are we anticipating that, like in section 3, for instance, on the draft, that it will be individualized according to each request?
Are we looking at the grant agreement?
Yeah, which one we look
I'm
section
looking
A?
at your ARPA, your draft of the CCAC 2024 ARPA grant agreement.
Yeah, we
need
know
that
this is going to
section
stay
three.
the same. The city will pay 50% of the grant in an amount not to exceed, and that could just be blank. We don't know what the dollar figures are. You guys are going to decide. But
if
we're going to
we-
pay them 50% at the start of the capital improvement project.
That's
Okay.
50 of the 80.
Correct, 50 of what we're giving them.
And is there any flexibility in that? Like, let's say a not-for-profit has a large grant from Lilly Center, but they need to raise 20% or something, like immediately, but they need the commitment that we're going to be paying the whole. If we can we manipulate that section 3? Are you saying that when we approve this, we're going to agree that no matter what they come and ask for, it's 50/50? That's my question. Or will there be any leeway on that section?
Okay, so if they ask for 30,000, then we could pay up to 80%, which would be 24. And then are you asking, is there any leeway on the 12 and 12?
Correct.
I think that's up to you all.
I mean, I want to know what we're approving tonight. If we're approving all the language in this sample draft except for the name, or are we approving
amounts.
the application?
So one thing I just wanted to interject, and I think Jack and Cindy maybe were a little bit ahead of the game, because my understanding is today we received some new information that council projects, we're not allowed to pay more than 50% at the start. And I think we're just receiving information about that today. We were sent some
Okay.
samples about that today. But it was all new information today that state legislature was going to have some impact on the gifts that council was going to be able to provide.
Okay.
So the discussion was also that we wanted to make sure that the project got completed, and it was the project that they promised to do, and that 50% of the value should be enough to purchase materials or what else they might need to start the project from their vendor or their builder or whomever, and that there would be an understanding, and probably most vendors, contractors would understand if they had this written agreement that the city would be good for the remaining 50% of their gift once it was completed. But there was no contemplation between Jack and Cindy and myself that it'd be anything less or more than the 50%.
As far as the dollar amount, I'll remind you that there's $90,000 in this year's budget for this specific purpose,
Right.
and $90,000 in next year's. So there's $180,000 total. And if you want to set a cap, that's entirely up to you all. As far as, I mean, could somebody come in and utilize the entire amount? I mean, I think,
Be up to us.
yeah. I think it was kind of left so that there was some flexibility there.
So that's what you're, on the actual application, you're wanting to know if we want to adopt that with like that language or something different, that the anticipated grant award may range from $5,000 to $50,000. You said we might want to include that language.
Yeah, I didn't know what kind of people or groups that, not people, but groups that you anticipated applying for this. I didn't know if you were trying to entice $5,000 projects or just a very few, very expensive projects. But that's for this council to decide who they think might be potential applicants. And it might be useful when you send out the applications to say, we will consider a grant for $5,000, we will consider up to this amount. So I didn't know if you all would want to arrange. It was just a suggestion I put in this application for a discussion point for you all to have when you were soliciting or allowing people to solicit you for these grants.
For comparison, the downtown, the Main Street has a revolving loan fund, and they had had a cap on it for a long time, and they weren't getting the activity, so they took the cap off. And that was a Hyatt Palma suggestion. And that just basically, that's just one other thing to consider. If you've got 180,000, do you want to impact one business a big way, 2 businesses, 3 businesses? I mean, I think that's where you have to maybe set a cap of a certain amount. And I would assume you'd want to do that tonight.
And it does say that we would make available up to 80%, so that does give us a little
But it says around here, the grant award may range from 5 to 50,000, but it says may.
Yeah.
And you know what?
Anticipated.
I picked those numbers. That wasn't Jack or Cindy. It was in putting forth an example that you all might consider and talk about as you went through this process. Maybe you would consider someone applying for less than 5,000. Maybe you'd consider someone applying for more than 50,000. I just thought it made sense on the application so that those people who picked up an application would say they would consider this project, or this is not enough of an ask, or this is too much of an ask. So I thought that made sense to have some range, but that was an arbitrary number that I picked out. That didn't come from Jack or Cindy. It was just arbitrary.
Joe, you made the comment that we might want to put a cap on it. Is that right? Did I understand it that way?
It seemed like that's what Diana was asking about.
Right. And what was your reasoning for we might want to do that? And then I'll ask them, do you want to do that, or?
No,
how
I
do you
just
wanna
heard
do
from
it?
the council that they wanted to know what the cap was, or
Okay.
if you're going to
Well,
consider the full
I
180.
just wanted to know what his note there was. Tonight, do we need to decide that amount in order to pass this, is what I was asking, if we wanted an amount on there. I guess, and just off the top of my head, I'm thinking that there were 5 or 6 not-for-profits that were not funded this year based on our new formula. So if we wanted to offer the opportunity for them, and you've got $180,000, you would say no more than 30,000 if you wanted to be sure that everybody kind of had an equal opportunity.
If
But
someone's
some
asking
might
for
ask
less,
for
you wanna
less,
leave
yeah.
money on the table.
Then you could use more, exactly, so.
Would the prudent thing to do, unless I'm missing something, be to go ahead and approve the application so people can start applying for this money? And as these applications come in, we can see who's asking for what and how much, and then approve them on their own merit? Because I'm not real comfortable approving an agreement that's a sample. I'd like to see specifically who's applying for how much and what it's for, but at least get the process started by approving the application
Well, and we
get the
did have to
information.
give us a sample, just so that you knew somewhat where we were starting from.
Mhm.
So Mike, I was going to ask that question, logistically speaking, right? So this has a little bit less to do maybe with the application, but let's just assume we move forward. Is there going to be a period of time in which people can apply, a finite period, and then we review every single application and divvy grants out that way? Or is it going to be open?
Well, I view it, and you guys, can weigh in on this, and if you want to put more parameters on it, fine. I view it as it's open until the money runs out, or, well, yeah.
For this
until
year,
the money runs
for
out,
this year,
for
Jack,
this year
or are
and
you
next
talking
year.
just this year?
We have to have it
It's
done.
90 and 90.
We have to have it done by the end of 2024. I
Right,
don't anticipate
total.
us having 90 this year, getting that many approved. We might. We could stop at that 90, or we could carry on.
So-
And do the whole 180.
I believe the big bullet points, I think Mike's dead on about what we need to start with. The big bullet points are, from what I know, is the approval of this will be for capital improvements or capital expenditures. And I think that would be good if we agreed to that, because I think that's one part of it. I think the next part is that it would be up to 80%, that the group would have to raise and spend at least 20% of its own. I think that's the second big part. And the last big part is 50% of the funds will be available at the start of the project. The remaining 50% of the funds won't be paid until the end of the project.
And it has to be spent by 2026.
And it has to be spent by 2026. I think those are the biggest parts of it, which generally go to the application. But it would be good that they knew that when they applied, it had to be for capital expenditures or improvements, that they would have to provide at least 20% of the cost of the project, and that they would be limited to 50% up front. They'd get the remaining 50% on the back end, and that it has to be spent by 2026.
Are we going
And
to,
that their board has to.
And that their board has to approve it.
And are they going to provide receipts?
They certainly will provide receipts.
But it needs to be
So
stated.
you've got all that in the grant application, except for the 50% at one point, 50% at another point, and that it must be spent by 2026. So those could be points 5 and 6 on there, and then.
And that would be easy for us to add.
And then you wouldn't, and then we wouldn't need to, I appreciate looking at the agreement, but I don't know that I want that sent out to any applicants, you know, to see that.
now, I envisioned the application is, you know, we send it, that part gets sent out, they fill it out, they understand what's going to be asked of them. When we come back to the grant agreement, that would be as
That's
an
what-
ordinance.
Yeah,
And at that point, these numbers would get filled in.
yeah.
That would be part of the ordinance. And no, they would not be sent this, we would be filling that out. Is that correct, Scott?
I don't anticipate it being an ordinance. I think it, and you guys will decide.
Okay. Well,
Previously, there was a committee that reviewed applications and made recommendations to the full council that they reviewed the applications and they recommended that these awards be made by the council. I assume that's how you're going to move forward with this, but that's all for you all to decide.
so if the Board of Works would take care of the second half of it.
That the committee would make a recommendation to the council to choose these grant recipients. The council would then approve the grant recipients and send those requests to the Board of Works to approve the agreement to fund the grant award that the council approved.
So we could just add the 5 and 6.
I think that would be the best thing to do. I think that satisfies
approve.
Mike's question and gets to what Mr. Clenderis wanted to go, and I think you're dead on, Ms.
And
Quantz,
then
that would.
approve that.
And that would let everybody know that our plan is
Yeah.
for you to apply, this is how you're going to get your money. And then, of course, just whatever the remaining application information you've always requested would also be added at the bottom. Names, addresses, board members, conflicts, whatever it might be that there would be.
Yeah, we just asked for like proof of their nonprofit status, their number.
What,
all
I
that
didn't
stuff.
know what was on the previous request for the application,
but-
but whatever other information you needed.
Do you want to specifically say how you want 5 and 6 to read, or just adds number 5 and 6?
I will add number 5 to state that it will be paid, 50% of the grant will be paid at the start of the project, and 50% of the grant will be paid at the end of the project. And then,
Number 6 would be the dates.
Must be spent.
and number
by-
6, that it must be spent prior to,
December
2026.
December
With an
31st,
agreement by
2026.
with agreement by the end of 2024, spent by the end of 2026.
Yeah.
And I can add all that, and so I think we can approve that, subject to that condition that gets
And I
added.
think the amount down at the bottom leaves it kind of open where it says may range from 5 to 50,000. Just gives a rough idea of where we're at, but it says may, that doesn't mean you all couldn't consider a higher amount. Unless you want to just take that out.
My reaction is I don't like those parameters. I don't.
Yeah, I would just take
I
them
don't.
out.
Take them out.
I think so. That's my opinion.
I mean, that's reasonable. I think that's very reasonable.
I would go along with that.
So then in the agreement, would it specify, or the MOU or whatever we come up with, would it specify that all receipts must be included?
Yeah, I think it needs to do that.
But do we not want to talk about the agreement tonight? We're just talking about the application for that?
I say just the application for now, and
Yeah.
get it out there, and then we're gonna tailor the agreements.
The MOU
according to
will
the
be
request.
part of it. The MOU will be an agreement with the Board of
But this
Works.
gives us the framework. the
So here's what
outline.
I will plan to do. I'll add 5 and 6 as we just discussed, and then I will forward that agreement to Jack and Cindy so they can add at the, going on 7, 8, 9, whatever, with what they normally ask applicants to provide, such as proof of nonprofit status or whatever else, the additional things that have been traditionally asked on the application. And I'll provide that with Jack and Cindy in the next
Since
day or
this is
two.
ARPA money, is it required that they're not-for-profit?
Well, we just set, when we did the ARPA budget, we set aside
That's our
that much
parameters,
for.
not our process.
That's what we want to stick with?
not-for-profits. Yeah, so.
Okay.
Just
asking the question.
We claimed our 10 million, or our, since we were under 10 million, we claimed it as revenue loss. So we can basically use it however, and that's how, what was coming.
Well, that's why I asked, because if we can
Well, the
use it-
early guidance was small business or non-for-profit.
Okay.
And discussions with the council group here was to stay with non-for-profits.
Okay.
Because we were already funding the small business revolving loan through
Okay.
Petco, so.
Well, that opens another
yeah.
can of worms, and I think that's what
I just
was
wanted to be
decided
clear.
upon. We're not bound, I mean, in the allocation, in the ARPA budget, it says specifically non-for-profit funding. Okay, all right, so,
Well, are we happy with this idea?
Yeah, I am.
does it make sense to prepare that and bring it back next meeting? Are you ready, feel like you're ready to go with it, Jack?
I'd like to see it, I think.
All right, let's do that. All right, there's a couple of you shaking your heads. Let's get this thing retooled, and we'll bring it back for final approval. I think we've got a pretty good idea where we're heading with it. So, okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
The final item would be a conflict of interest, acknowledging Jamie Navarro, or Roy Navarro. Did some catering, does some catering for the city. I'd ask that you acknowledge that.
That was
By show of hands.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. All right. Any other matters come before the council?
I make a
All
motion
right.
to adjourn.
Haven't had a 2-hour meeting in a while, so thank you for your patience. We got a lot done tonight.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. With that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I made it already.
Oh, yeah, you did. All right.
There you go.
Hi, Jurgen.
Mike and I do it once in a while. Eat at El Como.
I'm sorry?
We eat at El Como.
Upset.